Hey Holly, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, Sam?
Yeah, really good. Thanks so much for spending time to go over a couple of things regarding
Absolute
public
pleasure.
sector today, and hopefully as part of the GX Summit, you're going to have a fruitful day as well. So
Oh, it sounds very exciting. I'm glad to be here.
brilliant, brilliant. And yeah, just wondering if you can give obviously the audience a brief overview, introduction for yourself, and obviously Tussell, and then I can explain how we use it.
Yeah, of course. So my name is Hollie Hodgson. I'm the head of account management at Tussell. We are a data provider on the UK public sector, and effectively buyers and suppliers are using us to make data-driven decisions.
And I have to say, I can back that up because I'm Sam Winterbottom, Public Sector Director at Gamma, and we utilize the Tussell platform for an awful lot of market intelligence and market information. And I don't think we could live with it when we're looking to form our strategy and our go-to-market and public sector. So a really useful tool.
Delighted.
And of course, there is another massive event that's happening with the new Procurement Act and the new procurement rules that are happening in the public sector. Coming through in October, I believe, isn't it, this year? So,
yeah, we've got the official go live date. I'm a bit of a procurement and data nerd, so you're speaking to the right person about it. There are some really exciting things. So things like new notice types, supplier registry. Things like a debarment list, a lot more just like flexibility around the types of procedures that you'll use. I think if you are a contracting authority, absolutely have a look at the guidance that the government is putting out. There's some really good people out there that are pushing out the messaging, a lot of training and procurement policy notes. There was a recent one that came out that was effectively like enshrining in the Procurement Act a previous policy note. It's all about sort of taking in consideration better social outcomes in your procurement activities. So I'm excited to see the data come in. I am always curious to see how it will transpose into action. I think one of the important messages I always sort of reflect on is the PCR, which was the previous Act, Public Contracts Regulation. It was already a really good bit of legislation in terms of transparency. There is already a lot of data out there, and the government is actually, well, the UK in particular versus like other countries around the world, is really miles ahead in many ways when it comes to what needs to be published. Sadly, the data isn't transposing to much usefulness for a lot of the contracting authorities involved. It can feel a little bit like data for data's sake. And if you can't answer a really basic question such as, how many contracts does Microsoft hold? It can get a bit frustrating continuously having to put that information out there. And as a contracting authority, you can't say, what are contracts with Microsoft like versus the rest of the public sector? Are we overpaying for these services? What can we learn from innovation with things like Copilot? What are other authorities doing? So I'm always sort of inclined to believe culture eats legislation for breakfast.
Absolutely. Yeah,
and you need to really drive the benefits to these contracting authorities, else you are going to see issues with transparency. That's my 2 cents.
No, absolutely. But what's the point of having loads of data if you can't make use of it and you don't understand what the data is telling you? So it's also really important, as you say. And the part of the services I know that you guys provide at Tussell to the public sector. So yeah. I mean, I think as a supplier on the supplier side of things, and we both are, there are some really positive things from the Procurement Act coming
Definitely.
through. The locker room for for one set of information, so you don't have to send out the same insurance documents and to every tender, and hopefully that's as good as I think it looks in my head, and makes it really easy. But as you said, moving away from meat, most economically advantageous, to MAT. So social value plays a bigger part, because I think at the end of the day, let's face it, all stakeholders, if I look at Gamma, all our stakeholders have an interest in us being more socially valuable, to be quite honest. Doing more around sustainability and our people and what we're doing to promote careers and tech jobs and all of those areas that are really important for the government as well. So
and the public sector has never said buy cheapest. But I think the move from meat to MAT definitely will help, just in terms of, again, driving that sort of culture change. I think the new procedure types and just generally being a lot more flexible with how they buy is going to see some like really interesting stuff with very like innovative procurement teams. I think the best procurement people will really make use of that. And what the government really needs to do is ensure that there is like shared learning that's happening, and that you're not, I mean, it's the same in any sort of industry. If you think about the tech space, it's really hard to get the best tech talent. It is absolutely the same for procurement, and making sure that the best people out there their stories are being able to be told to different teams. And this was like a one procurement family.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, yeah, thank you so much for the overview, Hollie. Now, just diving down a little bit to our kind of area at Gamma and in the tech space as well. What are some of the key tech trends and trends that you're seeing from the data, from the management data that you're getting on the platform?
Yeah, so we're definitely, for both technology and for telco, we're seeing huge market. If you look specifically just at telco, it's been around 2 billion for the last couple of years. Wider IT, it's like between the 17, 18 billion pound mark. Both did see like huge spike ups from COVID. Naturally, there was a lot of technology needed for whether it's the contact centers piece or things like track and trace. Different parts of each of the market have seen sort of different changes since then. So after the COVID period, contact centers did shoot down, but they have been rising year on year. We can also see like some interesting stuff with like IoT. So specifically for the telco portion, IoT is now consistently around a third of the market.
That's incredible, isn't it? Yeah. From a position, I presume, of zero, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think you're also seeing some like really interesting stuff with AI. It's something that I'm always nosying around our database for. So I think particularly like in local authorities, you see some cool stuff with whether it's like operational improvements. So things like Copilot, I know Microsoft has been doing a lot around there. But also like more about driving citizen services and doing things a lot more proactively. I know that's something in particular bodies like GDS are really trying to drive home, being more proactive services, like what they have with like this single app in like Ukraine. I think there's another in Poland. Like I was seeing just the other day, something for like road AI, where it's actually how can we use artificial intelligence to proactively look for, road improvements or changes with the weather. And then you've got like really big projects like HP. They've got, I think it's called like Isambard, the big like supercomputer center with the University of Bristol. That's a cool one. And also I think like Microsoft supercomputing with the Met Office. Both of those are really big projects to look out for.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time, isn't it? But on the AI piece, let's go do Internet of Things first. But yeah, absolutely. No, we're seeing a big spike in interest in machine to machine SIMs and what's happening in that space, and it's all down to the push around smart cities, isn't it? And again, going back to data and being able to collect data that's really useful and helps you plan. How a city works. So we're seeing a fair amount of uptake in that space, and I just think it's going to grow exponentially as well. So we've got an organisation, an Internet of Things organisation called Fusion IoT, and we're really starting to look to expand that in the UK over the next few months and years. So because the trend is the move to smart cities, and of course, lots and lots of other applications as well. So
definitely, I think there's around like £300 million of roll-offs over the next couple of years for IoT. So definitely something that you guys could be supporting with.
Yeah, it can be anything, can't it? From sort of parking meters through to sensors on lights and all the way through. So lots of good stuff going on, and lots of stuff in the procurement pipeline as well. So, yeah,
I think with like broader telco as well, we're seeing a real importance around sort of the key players that are involved. So if you actually look at what the data has been showing for like the last year, whether it's on a contracting authority side or a buyer side, there is quite a big dominance of certain sort of bodies and parties. So if you look at like the two largest purchasing powers, so on like the contracting authority side, I think it's Home Office and the DfT, they represent like a third of all telco spending.
Yeah.
So for them, really driving better social outcomes will be really important. Because if you flip the data and say, who's been doing the best with SMEs, people like Department for Finance in Northern Ireland and like Cabinet Office, they are dominating the list, and getting those sorts of two players to work better together, I think would be really interesting for like that shared lessons learned.
Absolutely, working together. Yeah,
definitely. And if you also look at the top 10 telco suppliers, they represent a huge amount of the market, a huge amount. I believe it's around 2/3. So making sure that those sorts of suppliers, if you're working with them, the classic names, BT, Virgin Media, O2, Telefonica, people like that, that is really important just for making sure that they are also delivering better in terms of like local based outcomes, really driving local economies, working with innovative SMEs. I know that these guys are doing that, but making sure you're holding them accountable for that.
And I think that's a really interesting point, because, of course, one of the big trends we're seeing in well, it's not a trend, it's unfortunately cliff face, is the PSTN switch off in telecoms. Obviously, the Openreach and the Virgin networks closing down, copper networks closing down, and so we've still got a large number of customers in this space that are going to have to procure something and find a way to to get rid of their copper telephone lines. Essentially, there's still a really big knowledge push that's needed out there, and we're trying our hardest. We've got I don't know if you've seen we've got Morph as our PSTN switch off mascot, but we're really trying to bang the drum out there, and have been for a couple of years, because this is another massive trend that we're seeing, and people are going to have, organisations, particularly in the public sector, are really going to have to make some changes, because December 2025, which is when the switch off happens, is they're going to have an alternative service, or not need the service because it's going to stop. So we really do have a mega trend in the telecoms market as well.
Definitely. And I think, like I said, the role of those top players is important, because if you look at like the last few years, they just remain the same.
Yeah,
it is BT, Virgin Media, O2, and actually Motorola. But Motorola, I would expect, is going to change. They've held that position from the Emergency Services Program, which is now mutually ended.
Absolutely. Tricky one, that one.
Yeah. So Telefonica, I believe, is the next up, but I expect actually that position probably will just be taken by whoever picks up that. I don't think the supplier has been announced yet.
No.
I will be curious to see who wins.
Who it is. No, absolutely. I mean, an interesting case study from our side of things is the growth in mobile as well. There was a new framework that came out, mobile voice and data services, and RM6261 for the catchy title. And there's been some really good activity on that, and I believe that public sector organisations are buying really well from it. So one of our and it's on public knowledge. I've seen it on your management platform, your information platform. We won the Home Office mobiles, and that's been a really exciting project to roll out. So going back to your sort of top departmental spenders, really pleased with that. But and great to see it appearing on the reports as well. So, the transparency.
Frameworks are a really good way for contracting authorities to get a better deal from suppliers. It's much clearer if you're buying something with a predetermined price list on there, rather than having to do a lot of the negotiation. And particularly, I think COVID it was like a wake-up call for contracting authorities. The huge uptick in use of call-offs is very visible in Tussell, but it is absolutely continued. If you look at the sort of, whether it's the major players or sort of broader market, broader IT, frameworks being used for over half of everything that's going through these days. So it's definitely good news if you want to get a better deal. And I think for suppliers, it's just really important to know which ones to get on, and for buyers to know which ones are actually best to use for it. If you look at something like, cybersecurity, you're going to use very different frameworks to what you're going to be using for a sort of broader transformation project.
It's really interesting you talk about cybersecurity, because I just wanted to touch on that as well. We at Gamma, we recently acquired a company called Satisnet, who are a managed security services company, have a managed SOC and a raft of other features as well. And so we're really looking to get into cybersecurity in the public sector. What are your thoughts around the opportunity in cybersecurity? Because obviously part of our go-to-market strategy is what do we think the market size is, and how do we best service it?
Cybersecurity is definitely a growing market. It's definitely becoming more and more of importance, whether you're in central government, where I think it's historically always been very large, but particularly for local authorities as well. If you look at things like, I think it was Hackney that had that cyber breach, it's really important the citizens' data is being best protected.
100%.
We often see things like G-Cloud being frequently used, particularly on sort of buying the software piece. Whereas things more like cybersecurity services, which is the big CCS framework, it's DPS, so it's got a constant sort of pool of suppliers being added. That I would say is being used for a lot more of the services based. MOD is a really big top one. It naturally has to procure a lot of cybersecurity. I know that they got quite a lot of press recently over one of those breaches, and it just shows how important it is for dedicated budget for contracting authorities to deal with these sorts of problems. If you have one cyber attack, whether it's at your local council or something like, if you think about our energy security grid, it's important to have things in place like digital twins to make sure that these systems can still continue to be run.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really important point. We've recently got on as you mentioned, cybersecurity services DPS. The DPS being you can join it at any time, after the Satisnet acquisition, and it's really interesting some of the projects that are flowing over there. So I think it's there are a large number of contracts coming up for renewal, but also technology and cybersecurity changes all the time, doesn't it? And there's always going to be bad actors out there, and it's a question of staying up to date and really, thinking ahead of the game, isn't it? So
definitely,
yeah. So we're looking forward to doing much more in the public sector around the cyberspace.
Yeah, that's one of them. There's not actually very often where a framework agreement, or DPS in this case, soon to be DPS Plus, I believe they're going to call them. It's not often that they actually get close to exceeding the estimated value. The very nature of these agreements is technically nothing can go with them, go through them rather. So usually the estimations, you do treat them as estimations. Just because they say, oh, this has a potential value of £50 billion does not mean £50 billion might actually go through it.
No,
but for that cybersecurity DPS, they're literally almost about to exceed the estimated one. So
there's a lot flowing.
Yeah, I expect the CCS will be updating that value soon. But because it's a DPS anyways, it won't really change in terms of suppliers being able to get on it. Usually, if a framework is about to exceed the value, then they should open that framework up to make sure that they can bring in more innovation and other suppliers to work on it.
And I think the new Procurement Act's got some more flexible type frameworks as well, hasn't it? So
DPS Plus.
Yeah.
That's going to definitely.
I haven't quite got my head around that yet. So I mean, you have obviously. So what's that? What's that all about?
I don't want to be giving too much guidance on it. There's a lot of stuff in there that like the Cabinet Office are pushing out in terms of guidance around using those sorts of routes to market. And like I said, I think generally there'll be a lot more flexibility with procedures anyways. But I think DPS are really good just because, particularly in like innovative markets like IT, or actually if you're thinking about delivering like social care services, like you need a constant turnaround for these sorts of suppliers, especially if you have situations where, some markets don't tend to be the most sort of like profitable, I suppose. Like social care is quite a good example. And so the financial stability of those suppliers is really important, and making sure that we can't be locked out of delivering such an important service in the public sector is really important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's going to be game changing, isn't it? I think so. And as you said, health is a big area. Depending on whoever the government is, I know that spending in health is going to go up. So
definitely, our founder refers to them as sort of like the big Ds in the public sector. So things around like decarbonisation, defence, and data. Just those are some of the key areas to watch out for, especially in the NHS. We've got an aging population, we have fragmented data sets, and we really need to be able to drive a lot of efficiency with how things are being delivered. And in terms of sort of how that compares to the rest of the public sector, the NHS has seen a huge increase already in terms of IT and telco spend. So those are definitely areas that I would keep my eye on.
I still think it's largely down to suppliers as well to approach, innovation in such a way that we really help our organizations to get the most, the biggest bang for their buck and do more with less. You hear it all the time, but actually you need to deliver that as a supplier. And some of these technological or some of these challenges can be overcome with technology and by moving digital. So there's it's just going to be a growing space, this, I think. And,
definitely.
But it really does boil down to as a supplier, wanting to make a difference, be proactive, and be innovative. So
definitely. So many whether it's buyers or suppliers, you can just react to requirements coming in. And the best way to be successful in the public sector, whether it's about driving better procurement outcomes or wanting to grow in the public sector as a supplier or, partner up with other suppliers, I think it's a better way of saying it. It's really important. Don't sit on your hands. Really just look out, what are other people doing? What data can we utilize in order to be able to make those better outcomes? Just constantly reacting to tenders is not an efficient way of doing it. No. Usually a tender is sort of the culmination of a lot of the procurement activities. There are some things that you can't just direct award via framework agreement. So usually when I see a tender, I'm thinking it's been written with someone in mind, because you have done all of that pre-engagement. They've had someone that has been telling them, this is what you need. This is going to drive the better outcomes.
It really is, important to be proactive, as you say. And the other thing, I really like using the word outcomes, because I think that's so important, isn't it? What do you want to achieve? Don't tell us the technology that you think you need to get there. Just what do you want to achieve, and then let the suppliers be really creative and innovative about how you get there. Definitely. As long as it meets the outcome you're looking for, then having a different array of ideas and concepts is rather than the specific technology is
definitely
just really breeds that creativity, doesn't it? So.
There's a really good book by Peter Smith called Bad Buying, again, for any procurement nerds out there. And it really just talks about how you should be outcome focused in your procurement activities. I think it was a really good example around wanting to buy something that you could write with in space and going through all of these technological designs. And then it's like, a pencil would work. And just focusing a lot more on the outcomes rather than like the inputs for it.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, really, really useful for having a chat. I think that's potentially us, Hollie. Thank you very much for taking the time to have a discussion around all things. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.